So in this video, I'll be talking about supply function and supply curve. You remember the law of supply. The law of supply states that the higher the price of a commodity, the higher the quantity supplied, and vice versa. In other words, the lower the price of the commodity, the lower the price of a commodity, the lower the quantity supplied. All other things being equal. What does this mean? This implies that wherever the price of a commodity increases, the sellers will be willing to sell more, and when the price is lower, the sellers will be willing to sell less. In other words, at a higher price, the seller will be willing to sell more of the commodity, more units of the product, and at a lower price, the seller will be willing to sell less units of a product. So this law expresses the relationship between the quantity supply and the price of the commodity. So summarily, the law states that when the price of the commodity rises, the effect will be that the quantity supply will also rise. But when the price falls, the effect will be that the quantity supply will also fall. This is law of supply. Law of supply. This is the summary of the law of supply. That is, there is a direct relationship between the quantity supply of a commodity and the price of that commodity, or like that is a positive relationship between the quantity supply of the commodity and the price of that commodity. But mind you, it's not only the price that affect the quantity supply. There are other factors that also affect quantity supply. That is why in that law, we hold other factors that can influence, that can affect quantity supply constant. We say the law of supply states that the higher the price of a commodity, the higher the quantity supply, and the lower the price of the commodity, the lower the quantity supply. All of that is being equal. Other things being equal here is very important to put it. It means that apart from the price that we are allowed to change, that we are looking at the effect of quantity supply, other factors that can affect quantity supply are held constant. For example, the cost of production has not changed. There is no technological improvement and other factors that can affect the quantity supply. All those factors are held constant. That is, we assume they remain the same. We are only looking at the effect of the price of the commodity on the quantity supply. So this relationship, we can transform it into a mathematical equation. So a mathematical equation that expresses relationship between the quantity supply of a commodity and its determinant, that is the determinant of the quantity supply. So, like I said, determinants of the quantity supply include the price of the commodity itself, also cost of production, also include level of technology, okay, level of technology. So that is, if there is change in level of technology, maybe increase in level of technology, okay. So we expect the production to be higher, and therefore the quantity supply will be higher, okay. Now, but when we show this relationship mathematically, so we call it a supply function. For example, let's say I have a supply function can be represented as Qs equal, that is a function, Q is a function of P, just like we have demand. Okay? But in order to make it clearer, I can put positive sign here to indicate that this relationship is a direct relationship, that is a positive relationship. That is, wherever the price goes up, the quantity supply also goes up, and wherever the price comes down, the quantity supply also comes down. Okay? So, but this function is an implicit function. Implicit function because it does not show the form of the mathematical equation, whether it's in linear form or non-linear form. So we usually express supply curve in linear form, although we might also have non-linear form in some cases, but most of the time we express it in linear form. Okay. In other words, I can express the supply curve as Q. If I know the supply curve I'm expressing as a Q, S is equals to, because I don't want it to conflict with demand curve. We respect our demand function as A minus BP, okay, because I've used A and B, so I don't want to introduce convolution, so I'm going to use other parameters. Let me use other letters. So if I use C, okay, C plus BP. Why did I say plus? The plus here implies that there is a positive relationship between quantity supply and the price. Okay. In other words, this C represents the intercept of the supply curve or supply function. Okay. So likewise, this B here, okay, you can see B or plus B, as the case may be, represent the inverse of the slope of a supply curve. Inverse of the slope of the supply curve. In other words, we say which is equivalent to the slope of a direct supply curve. When we have our supply curve as this, let's say this is quantity supply and this is the price, we have 0 here. If I draw my quantity there, I draw a supply curve. Let me start from here. This is supply, right? If the supply curve is here, okay, and this is P, this is Q. If I want to know the slope of this supply, the slope is simply change in P, that is the vertical increase divided by the horizontal increase, Q. But if you look at this function here, from this function, I can only have change in Q, S, so change in P. You can see this is the inverse of this. Okay, this is a direct supply function. Okay, if I derive the QS, the P is going to be plus B. Okay, plus B here is the slope of a direct supply function, not supply cost. Anyway, supply cost, although they may be used interchangeably. Okay, here we said is the inverse of the slope of a supply curve. Okay, you can see the Q as the P here is equals to plus B. Okay, you can see this is plus B. But here, the P, the Q here, okay, is equals to 1 over B. 1 over B, because this is the inverse of this. Hope that is clear. So in our next slide, we're talking about how to graph a supply function. That will make you to understand this better. Thank you. See you in the next video.